A train with several private cars carries the Emperor and his official party swiftly to Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. This will be the first meeting for President John F. Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy with the man who played a leading role in the creation of African unity.
Gentlemen, I know I speak in behalf of all of my fellow Americans in welcoming His Imperial Majesty back to the United States. Since His Majesty visited the United States nearly a decade ago, we have seen one of the most extraordinary revolutions in history, and that has been the appearance on the world scene of 29 independent countries in the short space of less than 10 years, including over 150 million people. The conference recently held in His Majesty's capital served, I think, to bring together in a great cooperative movement the people of most of these countries. And the success of that conference was due in no small part to the leadership of our distinguished guest. His efforts to move his country forward and provide a better life for its people, and his efforts throughout the world, which stretch back over 30 or 40 years. For all of this, Your Majesty, we take the greatest pride in welcoming you here. You do us honor, and I can assure you that there is no guest that we will receive in this country that will give a greater sense of livelier pride and satisfaction to the American people than your presence here today. Your Majesty, you're most welcome.
Mr. President, Mrs. Kennedy, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply touched by the generous words of welcome which you have addressed to me, Mr. President, and by the warmth with which the American people have greeted me during the few short hours I have been in the United States. In the decade which has elapsed since my first voyage to America, the face of the globe has been vastly altered. Africa and Asia have been transformed into continents whose people are almost entirely removed from the subjugated status which was the lot of so many of them but a few short years ago. As free men, we Africans are now seeking the unity and the oneness which will enable us to put our freedom to the best use. The service of the peoples of our continent, the defense of right and justice, the protection of the peace.
የህዝባችን ኑሮ ደረጃ ተሻሽሎ ድህነትና ድንቁርና ከዓለም እንዲወገድ ቁርጥ ሐሳብ አድርገናል።
The Emperor of Ethiopia has come to Washington to discuss important aspects of world peace and economic progress. He confers with President Kennedy on African problems and aspirations in these vital areas. memorial to Abraham Lincoln. The Emperor and his party arrive at the Lincoln Memorial to place a silver wreath in honor of the American president, who is an international symbol of unity and freedom. President Kennedy's Secretary of Interior, Stuart Udall, accompanies the Emperor. Included in the Emperor's party are Ras Imru Haile Selassie, Ambassador Dinky, Ethiopian Ambassador to the United States, and Ambassador Corey, United States Ambassador to Ethiopia. Mr. Udall reads from Abraham Lincoln's immortal Gettysburg Address.
They gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
At the National Legislature, the Vice President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, and leaders of the Senate and House of Representatives hold discussions with the Emperor. This is where the men and women elected by the American people make the laws which govern them and determine American policies and world affairs. In the same room where President Kennedy holds his press conferences, the Emperor meets with over 500 representatives of the American and world press. He describes the purpose of his visit: to renew his acquaintance with our nation and to ensure that the ties of friendship which have linked the two countries over the years will be maintained and strengthened. In reply to one question, the Emperor says, "What interests us most in Africa today is the collaboration for the purpose of achieving unity for the benefit of Africa and as a contribution." Departing Washington, the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, and Mrs. Rusk accompany the royal party to a heliport at the Naval Observatory near downtown Washington. Members of the diplomatic corps pay their respects to the Emperor and members of the official party, which includes his granddaughter, Her Highness the Princess Ruth Desta. The first stage of the journey is aboard President Kennedy's helicopter to the airport, then on to New York City. New York, America's largest city, Towers of concrete and steel and organized stone probe the sky. Here, knowledge and culture are available to all who seek it. In libraries, in art museums, in cultural centers. Here is the library of the famed Columbia University, where Princess Ruth and many other Ethiopians have studied. The mayor of the city of New York, Robert F. Wagner, and Mrs. Wagner greet the Lion of Judah on the steps of the city hall. En route to the United Nations, where an open forum, nations can share the benefits of peaceful association. Secretary General U Thant greets the Emperor and is presented with the Charter of African Unity drafted at the Addis Ababa Conference and ratified by the African states. From the people of Ethiopia, a gift to the United Nations, a finely carved miniature of the great obelisk of Aksum, the ancient capital of Ethiopia. The Emperor addresses a special meeting of the General Assembly.
ክቡር ፕሬዚዳንት፣ የተከበራችሁ መልእክተኞች፣
The Charter of the United Nations expresses the noblest aspirations of man, the abjuration of force in the settlement of disputes between states, the assurance of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, the safeguarding of international peace and security.
ሰብአዊ መብቱ እንዲጠበቅለት ለማረጋገጥ የዓለም ሰላምና ጸጥታ እንዲጠበቅ ለማድረግ የሚያስችሉትን የሰው ልጅ የሚመኛቸውን ከፍተኛ ዓላማዎች የያዘ ነው።
Television is another medium of communication through which millions of Americans see and hear the Emperor. On a program devoted to current events, the sight and sound of free discussion is transmitted to the television audience. Gathered in the Emperor's hotel suite is an important resource of his country. Young people increasing their knowledge in the universities of America. One of the most satisfying moments of his tour, a face-to-face meeting with many of the Ethiopian students. In gratitude, they present him with a silver service. He thanks them and replies that the gift he wants most is unity of purpose, their cooperation in quickening the pace of Ethiopian development. All are working toward this goal. They include Ephraim Isaac, who conducts the Harvard Graduate School Chorus. His mission? To found a conservatory in Addis Ababa, taking his doctorate at Harvard University, where President Kennedy was also graduated. At Cornell University, Miss Abba Walder-Rufael, a graduate nurse from Ethiopia, takes her degree in medical education so that she may go back to her country and instruct others how to teach this science.